It is 7:38 p.m. on March 16, 2023. I'm resuming the reading of Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism by V.I. Lenin, beginning with page 25. The German economist Kästner has written a book especially devoted to the struggle between the cartels and outsiders, i.e., the capitalists outside the cartels. He entitled his work Compulsory Organization, although in order to present capitalism in its true light, he should, of course, have written about compulsory submission to monopolist combines. It is instructive to glance at least at the list of the methods the monopolies combine resort to in the present day, the latest, the civilized struggle for organization. 1. Stopping supplies of raw materials. Quote, one of the most important methods of compelling adherence to the cartel, end quote. 2. Stopping the supply of labor by means of alliances, i.e., of agreements between the capitalist and the trade unions by which the latter permit their members to work only in cartelized enterprises. 3. Stopping deliveries. 4. Closing of trade outlets. 5. Agreements with the buyers by which the latter undertake to trade only with the cartels. 6. Systematic price cutting to ruin outside firms, i.e., those which refuse to submit to the monopolist. Millions are spent in order to sell goods for a certain time below their cost price. There were instances when the price of benzene was thus reduced from 40 to 22 marks, i.e., almost by half. 7. Stopping credits. 8. Boycott. Here we no longer have competition between small and large, technically developed and backward enterprises. We see here the monopolists throttling those which do not submit to them, to their yoke, to their dictation. This is how this process is reflected in the mind of a bourgeois economist. Quote, even in the purely economic sphere, writes Kästner, a certain change is taking place from commercial activity in the old sense of the word towards organizational speculative activity. The greatest success no longer goes to the merchant whose technical and commercial experience enables him best of all to estimate the needs of the buyer, and who is able to discover and, so to speak, awaken a latent demand. It goes to the speculative genius, who knows how to estimate or even only to sense in advance the organizational development and the possibilities of certain connections between individual enterprises and the banks. End quote. Translated into ordinary human language, this means that the development of capitalism has arrived at a stage when, although commodity production still reigns and continues to be regarded as the basis of economic life, it has in reality been undermined, and the bulk of the profits go to the geniuses of financial manipulation. At the basis of these manipulations and swindles lies socialized production. But the immense progress of mankind, which achieved this socialization, goes to benefit the speculators. We shall see later how, on these grounds, reactionary petty bourgeois critics of capitalist imperialism dream of going back to free, peaceful, and honest competition. Quote, the prolonged raising of prices which results from the formation of cartels, says Kästner, has hitherto been observed only in relation to the most important means of production, particularly coal, iron, and potassium, but has never been observed in relation to manufactured goods. Similarly, the increase in profits resulting from this raising of prices has been limited only to the industries which produce means of production. To this observation, we must add that the industries which process raw materials and not semi-manufacturers not only secure advantages from the cartel formation in the shape of high profits to the detriment of the finished goods industry, but secured also a dominating position over the latter, which did not exist under free competition. End quote. The words which we have italicized reveal the essence of the case which the bourgeois economist admits so reluctantly and so rarely, and which the present-day defenders of opportunism, led by Kay Kautsky, so zealously try to evade and brush aside. Domination and violence that is associated with it. Such are the relationships that are typical of the latest phase of capitalist development. This is what inevitably had to result and has resulted from the formation of all-powerful economic monopolies. We will give one more example of the methods employed by the cartels. Where it is possible to capture all or the chief sources of raw materials, the rise of cartels and formation of monopolies is exceptionally easy. It would be wrong, however, to assume that monopolies do not arise in other industries in which it is impossible to corner the sources of raw materials. The cement industry, for instance, can find its raw materials everywhere. Yet in Germany, this industry too is strongly cartelized. The cement manufacturers have formed regional syndicates, South German, Rhine-Westphalian, etc. The prices fixed are monopoly prices, 230 to 280 marks a carload, when the cost price is 180 marks. The enterprises pay a dividend of from 12% to 16%, and it must not be forgotten that the geniuses of modern speculation know how to pocket big profits besides what they draw in dividends. In order to prevent competition in such a profitable industry, the monopolists even resort to sundry stratagems. They spread false rumors about the bad situation in their industry. Anonymous warnings are published in the newspapers, like the following, quote, "Capitalists don't invest your capital in the cement industry," end quote. Lastly, they buy up outsiders, those outside the syndicates, and pay them compensation of 60,000, 80,000, and even 150,000 marks. Monopoly hews a path for itself everywhere without scruple as to the means, from paying a modest sum to buy off competitors to the American device of employing dynamite against them. The statement that cartels can abolish crises is a fable spread by bourgeois economists who at all costs desire to place capitalism in a favorable light. On the contrary, monopoly, which is created in certain branches of industry, increases and intensifies the anarchy inherent in capitalist production as a whole. The disparity between the development of agriculture and that of industry, which is characteristic of capitalism in general, is increased. The privileged position of the most highly cartelized so-called heavy industry, especially coal and iron, causes a still greater lack of coordination in other branches of industry. As Jadels, the author of one of the best works on the relationship of the German big banks to industry, admits, quote, "The more developed an economic system is," writes Leifman, an unblushing apologist of capitalism, "the more it resorts to risky enterprises, or enterprises abroad, to those which need a great deal of time to develop, or finally to those which are only of local importance." End quote. The increased risk is connected in the long run with the prodigious increase of capital, which overflows the brim, as it were, flows abroad, etc. At the same time, the extremely rapid rate of technical progress gives rise to increasing elements of disparity between the various spheres of national economy, to anarchy and crises. Leifman is obliged to admit that, quote, "In all probability, mankind will see further important technical revolutions in the near future, which will also affect the organization of the economic system." Quote, electricity and aviation. Quote, "As a general rule, in such periods of radical economic change, speculation develops on a large scale." End quote. Crises of every kind, economic crises most frequently, but not only these, in their turn increase very considerably the tendency towards concentration and towards monopoly. In this connection, the following reflections of Heidel's on the significance of the crisis of 1900, which, as we have already seen, marked the turning point in the history of modern monopoly, are exceedingly instructive. Quote, "Side by side, the gigantic plants and the basic industries, the crisis of 1900 still found many plants organized on lines that today would be considered obsolete. The pure, non-combined plants, which had arisen on the crest of the industrial boom. The fall in prices and the falling off in demand put these peer enterprises into a precarious position, which did not affect the gigantic combined enterprises at all, or only affected them for a very short time. As a consequence of this, the crisis of 1900 resulted in a far greater concentration of industry than the crises of 1873. The latter crisis also produced a sort of selection of the best equipped enterprises, but owing to the level of technical development at that time, this selection could not place the firms which successfully emerged from the crisis in a position of monopoly. Such a durable monopoly exists to a high degree in the gigantic enterprises in the modern iron and steel and electrical industries, owing to their very complicated technique, far-reaching organization, and magnitude of capital, and, to a lesser degree, in the engineering industry, certain branches of the metallurgical industry, transport, etc. End quote. Monopoly. This is the last word in the latest phase of capitalist development. But we shall only have a very insufficient, incomplete, and poor notion of the real power and the significance of modern monopolies if we do not take into consideration the part played by the banks. That's the end of this section, stopping at page 30.